Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your time out of your busy schedules to participate with us. My name is David Ansel. I'm the Vice President of Water Protection at Save the Sound. And we wanted to host this webinar today to do a couple of things. One is to highlight our New York State policy and legislative work so that you understand what we're doing and what our priorities are. And then at the same time, we thought it was very important to share with you ways in which you can directly participate in New York State policy. And so we're going to show you some of the kind of basic activities and actions that you can take to get involved directly, so that obviously we love your participation with us, but there are things you can do to be engaged. And the more engaged New Yorkers are and voters are individually, the more effective we can be at trying to move our environmental policies forward in the state. And then we're going to hear from, we're very lucky and honored to have former Assemblymember Fred Thiele from Suffolk County is on the call, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about his experience as an Assembly member and some of the legislation. He just recently passed the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Law in Suffolk County, and he's going to talk to us about sort of what the most effective ways constituents and voters can impact policy and what works and what doesn't work from the perspective of a very experienced member of the New York State Assembly. So thank you, Fred, for being here. We really appreciate it. When we're done chatting with Fred, we'll open it up to Q&A. If during the presentation you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And then, as I said, towards the end, we'll do some Q&A. So Ella, you want to go to the next slide, please? So just quickly, I know that most or all of you already know this. Save the Sound is an environmental action organization, and we're made up of scientists, engineers, lawyers, and advocates working to protect the land, air, and water of Long Island Sound and the Long Island Sound region. We are very active in many ways, as that description highlights. Today, we're really talking just about policy, and the way we're organized to Save the Sound as it relates to policy is we have a team dedicated to working in Hartford to affect Connecticut policy, and we have a couple of folks who are keyed in on federal policy. And then here in New York, myself and Ella McGrail, who's on here, is our New York policy coordinator. She's based in Albany. We just recently hired her full-time, and we're very excited to have expanded our team and to have boots on the ground in Albany. And since I'm driving back and forth, it's nice to have someone who can just be there. And then we work very closely with David Siegerman, our New York communications lead, who is on this call. And we'll be talking about some of the ways that communications are so important and some of the things that David helps us with. So let's go to the next slide, Ella. So a quick sort of overview of what goes on in Albany and what we're doing in Albany. The legislative session in Albany starts in January every year, early January, and it goes until June, typically. Sometimes it can stretch and more days can be added. But that's the legislative season. It starts off very busily with the budget that comes from the governor, and then those negotiations and hearings go on. Typically supposed to be done by April 1, but you never know. And at the same time, legislation is starting to come from all the different offices in Albany on the Senate and the Assembly side. And then after the budget is done, things really sort of frantically pick up in terms of pushing legislation along. These pictures are good examples of how I spend my time and what we're doing. On the upper left-hand side is a picture of Ella and I having a meeting with State Senator Fred Harcum, who Peter Harcum. Sorry, I have Fred on my mind. Pete Harcum, who is the Senate chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee. He is a passionate environmentalist and a great advocate for the environment. And we do work closely with him and his staff on a number of different pieces of legislation. And he's always very helpful in terms of coming to events and speaking. On the right-hand side is the beginning of a long lobby day for clean water, which we're part of a very large coalition led by Adrian Esposito from Long Island, from CCE. And there's Pete Harcum again, and Assemblymember Chris Burdick, who's also on the ENCON committee. And then the slide on the bottom, the picture on the bottom is me meeting the governor and shaking her hand and thanking her for signing the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So that's out in Suffolk County, and we were very pleased that she enthusiastically signed that law. Relationships are very important in this business, and so it's really important to be meeting with staff and the assembly members and the senators, and making sure that you have good open lines of communication and that you're very credible. And they do rely on us for information. We're a science-based organization, so we often can provide support, technical support, help review bills or suggest bills. And those relationships are critical. This is my third session in Albany, and I think we've made a good stride towards really knowing the key players we need to know for environmental policy and working closely with the offices as well as our other NGO partners. So the last week, and I'll get to recent successes in a minute, but just to give you a flavor, the last 2 weeks have been exceptionally busy. The governor gave her State of the State address, which Ella and I attended, and then met with the governor very briefly and talked about a couple things. Then she dropped her budget, and we had to review that and respond and get press releases out. And then working with our coalition partners, deciding how we wanted to react to the budget and what our asks were going to be. So we were in Albany. I was in Albany last week. I drove back to Albany this week, and on Monday. On Tuesday, Ella and I participated in a lobby day for some waste reduction legislation. And then I testified at the Joint Environmental Conservation Committee hearing, Senate and the Assembly Conservation Committee hearing on the budget to testify about what our priorities are and what we're looking to see in the budget, which we'll get to in a few slides. And then the next morning, yesterday, I woke up and went to a hearing in the Assembly held by Deborah Glick, who's the chair of the Assembly ENCON Committee, to talk about what kind of legislation we need to pass to protect horseshoe crabs, which we're very concerned are not just in poor condition, but possibly drifting towards extinction in the state of New York. And so we're trying to get our arms around both the correct data as well as what the right regulatory or legislative needs are going to be to protect that species, which is very important to fishermen and the ecology of the Long Island Sound. So it's been a very busy week. I just got back last night, and now I'm talking to you. So now we can go to the next slide, Ella. So these two pictures are just a couple of highlights from some success we had 2 sessions ago with a bill called the Living Shorelines Act. I worked closely with State Senator Shelley Mayer, who's in that picture, and Assembly Member Steve Otis. They're both Westchester Sound Shore. They represent the Sound Shore region. And they're both very worried because their constituents care deeply about flooding and stormwater problems and water quality issues in the Sound Shore region of Westchester. And so we worked with them to pass something called the Living Shorelines Act, and they relied on us for technical support, our engineers and our biologists, to understand that using nature-based solutions when doing construction and work on the coastline is better for both climate, resilience, water quality, and flooding than building hardened surfaces. So this law requires that the DEC consider nature-based solutions when they are giving permits for that type of work. Who else is in that picture? I think the town supervisor from Mamaroneck and Larchmont, although she's cut off. In the next slide, this is a big rally we had out in Suffolk County. Again, another successful passage of some legislation in Albany and then in Suffolk County for the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act. So we had a big rally and a press conference to get media attention and try to get the word out to voters to vote for a proposition in Suffolk County to get this important water quality law passed. In the picture are a couple other Save the Sound. The turtle is not from Save the Sound, but Louise Harrison, who is a Save the Sound member, staff member on staff who lives in Suffolk County, and David Abreu is there also with me and the turtle. All right, next, Ella. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our priorities before we get into some ways you can directly get involved. I was talking to you about the budget, which we're really in budget season right now. So there are a number of things that we're advocating for in the budget, but these are just two highlights. And again, I just want to be really clear, we call it our legislative agenda, but there's two things going on, right? One is getting resources from the state, getting dollars in the budget for programs that address our needs, right? So the challenges that we see in the Long Island Sound are wastewater pollution, stormwater pollution, not enough green infrastructure, and dealing with resiliency and the effects of climate change, flooding and stormwater management. And so in the budget, these two programs are very important. The Clean Water Infrastructure Act and the Environmental Protection Fund provide grants and dollars for municipalities and communities and NGOs around the state to do maintenance, upkeep, and other projects on wastewater infrastructure, as well as green infrastructure, rain gardens, and other types of water management. So these are really important programs. And the governor, it's a negotiation. The governor comes in at lower numbers, and we request larger numbers. Last year, the governor we typically get 500 million for the CWYA. Last year, the governor tried to split it to 250. We ultimately got 500. This year, she came in at 500. We're trying to get 600 million. You all know about inflation, and you all know about affordability issues. So the costs of eggs and cheese and milk are going up, and so are parts for fixing wastewater treatment facilities. So we're looking for more money in that program. And the EPF typically comes in at 400, but for similar reasons, we're trying to get that number moved up. Also, we're very concerned that we don't have the partner in the federal government that we've had in terms of resources. So we're more reliant on New York dollars, we think, looking ahead to the next 4 years. So with that, Ella, do you want to chime in on some of these bills on climate and resiliency, which is one of our other big focuses?
Sure. So we got the Climate Resilient New York Act, which is touching on a lot of the things that David mentioned for the budget spending. But this bill would establish an Office of Resiliency in the New York State government, which would allow a much more coordinated and put together response to emergencies and some better prevention measures, so we're not just reacting. And the Rain Ready New York Act is also about resiliency, and that would give water authorities the ability to regulate stormwater as well as wastewater, which is important in giving communities another tool to combat stormwater and flooding. And the New York Heat Act has a lot of different components, but the general principle of it is it would stop the expansion and subsidizing of the gas system in New York. And it would cap utility prices for low and middle income folks at 6% of their income. So it's kind of a dual environmental justice and climate action bill. And the Cap and Invest program is a really crucial funding mechanism for New York's climate law, which encompasses a whole lot of things, but basically puts renewable energy targets and other environmental targets into New York state law. In order to fund those programs, the state is planning to put a price on carbon for certain emitters. And we're very supportive of that program coming out as soon as possible. It was supposed to come out this past December, but the governor has delayed that, and we are hoping for those regulations to come out as soon as possible.
Yeah, that was supposed to, there was a lot of talk about it being in the budget, and apparently the governor's staff actually had drafted the regulations and then at the last minute dropped it. So that's been a big frustration amongst all the green organizations in Albany this session.
Yeah, no small part of the chaos that David and I have been experiencing for the last 2 weeks, but that's part of what makes it interesting. And then do you want to talk about toxins and contaminants?
Sure, yeah. So we'll do this quickly. We can get into Ella's talk on how you can get involved. So again, our North Star is really water, and there are a number of different important pieces of legislation that have to do with waste and plastic and toxins that are in our water and in our bodies, and we'd like to get them removed. The Packaging Reduction Recycling Infrastructure Act would reduce the amount of waste through packaging on consumer goods that producers can use. So the idea would be to use less plastic, less containers. And if you think about when you get packages from Amazon, or you go to the supermarket and all the packaging on all kinds of consumer products that we use, to try to reduce that. There's a negotiation going on between whether it's 30 or 50% over 12 years, but that's the gist of it. The bigger, better bottle bill is, that you can turn in your bottles and cans for 5 cents. We're trying to get that up to 10 cents. There's a lot more to it, but for today, that's kind of the headline. And then you'll see a number of bills here related to PFAS, which is a very dangerous chemical, which we're starting to realize is, unfortunately, in many, many communities around the state of New York and the country. And it's a dangerous contaminant, and it doesn't break down easily. And while we're trying in the budget to address more testing and remediation dollars, the top line item for us right now is trying to get legislation passed to remove PFAS from product in the state of New York. And so there's 3 different bills here that do that. The PFAS in consumer and household products is the most broad of the 3. And Connecticut just passed this law last year. Minnesota's passed this law. Maine passed a version of it. And so we're really pushing for New York to be a leader on this. It's a real public health and safety issue. And then I think there's a salt bill on there at the bottom. We are working with Riverkeeper and Pete Harcum's office to address salt pollution. You know that when there's ice and snow on the roads, they salt the roads. You can imagine around the Long Island Sound region, all the highways, I-95 in Westchester and New York City, and all the impervious surfaces that are salted. That all ends up in our tributaries, in our bays and harbors. And so we're looking to see if we can get legislation to look at alternatives and safer, cleaner ways to protect the roads during storms. So those are just some highlights. What happens during session is we start out with this list, and then, we start out with this list, and then it tends to grow as more bills are introduced over the session. So we will be communicating out to you all during session if you're signed up, as our priority list grows and changes during session. So last, before we get into some of the blocking and tackling items, it's really important for everyone to understand that we at Save the Sound, we don't do this work alone. We are part of coalitions, and we work with many, many organizations in the state of New York to affect New York policy. Some of these folks we work with on local or county issues, but, and all the way from New York City, Renewable Rikers, where we're trying to get a new waste water treatment facility put in the westernmost part of the Sound in the Bronx, you know, all the way to the Peconic Baykeeper and the group for the East End out where Fred Thiele lives, who have been, you know, strong advocates for clean water out on the most eastern part of Long Island. And then a lot of these names you probably know from being involved in the Environmental Defense Fund, the Nature Conservancy, NRDC, the Sierra Club. These are really important allies, and we work in coalitions around clean water. We work on specific with these partners and coalitions on particular pieces of legislation. And we share notes with them. We agree on decisions about budget funding, and so that we are much more effective when we work together, and we represent that many more voters and constituents in the state of New York, and that amplifies our ability to get reaction and response from policymakers in Albany. So with that, Ella, I think you're up. Ella is going to talk about some of the ways you directly can get involved in helping make New York policy.
Was that just me?
You lost your slides.
I got kicked out, sorry. Let's go back in. Well, that's a good transition, wouldn't you say? All right, so David, are you ready for us to move into the next bit here?
You're in charge.
Okay, so we've talked about all these really fabulous bills to protect communities from extreme weather and fight climate change and protect clean water and get nasty chemicals out of things that touch our food. But what can you, this is the really interesting part, which is you. What can you do about all of this, and how can you participate in this work if you are so inclined? So one of the big things that David talked about that we do is we attend lobby days, and that's when advocates gather at the Capitol to visit legislators and talk to them about a particular set of policies or issues. These are usually organized by one or a group of nonprofit organizations like those partners that we showed you on the previous slide. And we come and we talk to legislators about the policies that we care about. And one of the really most powerful aspects of lobby days is constituents. And a lot of people feel that they don't want to come talk about a policy or about an issue unless they're super well versed in it and know all the details of the policy. But really, one of the most important parts of lobby days, if not the most important part of lobby days, is legislators just hearing from their constituents about why they care about a particular issue. And former Assemblyman Thiele can go a little bit more into that during his bit, but it's really powerful when folks have gotten on buses, sometimes at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes in sub-zero temperatures, which was the case last week, to come talk to their legislators about clean water or climate change. These are not experts. These people have often had to take the day off work or day off of taking care of their families or whatever to come spend their day in Albany. You really get your steps in too. This is not amateur hour. This is really, there's a lot of stairs, there's a lot of walking and knocking on doors. But the snacks, there are always free snacks, and the quality does vary widely, I have to tell you. But if you're in my group, sometimes I bring treats, like I brought brownies yesterday or 2 days ago. So if you're in my lobby group, you're all set. And this is actually a picture of my lobby group from a lobby day that we did last year with Beyond Plastics for the Packaging Reduction Act and the bottle bill. And these are some folks who work as professional recyclers in New York City. These are like, they go and they collect bottles and cans and get the deposit for a living. So they're making our communities cleaner, and that's their whole job. And they're coming to advocate for the raise that they deserve. And there were other people here who were just passionate about the environment, coming up to Albany to share that with their legislators. So that's lobby days. And also one second. We have whenever there's a lobby day to participate in, we will put that on our events calendar, which is available on our website. And there are several upcoming, like for the Adirondacks or for state parks, or there's Earth Day, Lobby Day coming up in April, and we will post those for you if you're interested in attending.
Yeah, and I just want to amplify a couple things. It is absolutely amazing, how many interesting people you meet and how many people are walking around in the Capitol. But Ella's point is really well taken that just regular city, you don't have to work at Save the Sound or, the Sierra Club to be impactful in these meetings. There are people who come, so many smart people or people who have really hands-on experience. If we're talking about recycling and you have somebody who actually works in a redemption center who can talk about how it really works and what's really going on, and it's really impactful. And then also a lot of these lobby days, while they may not strike you as specific to the Long Island Sound, the work that we do to protect and restore the Long Island Sound and the policies that we're advocating for are generally good for the whole state of New York, not just the Long Island Sound. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, in fact, they get really sick of hearing from the professional environmentalists. So it's good for them to hear about the personal stories from people in their districts, how this pollution or how climate is affecting them. So that's extremely powerful. And another way to demonstrate that kind of people power is by attending rallies. These are often combined with the lobby days. And this is another very important demonstration of people power. The picture on the right here is from New York Renews's Fund Climate Lobby Day, which happened last week, and over 400 people from across the state, all the way from like Buffalo to the tip of Long Island, came out to this lobby day. And we had labor unions, we had doctors, farmers, business owners, just people who do not do this for a living, who gave up their day to come advocate for climate action, for getting those cap and invest regulations out. People really pay attention to this, and at rallies are specifically an opportunity to get media's attention. This is the kind of situation where you're going to have newspapers coming and covering this, and that not only gets the attention of the wider community, also really gets the attention of elected officials. So action alerts. If you're like me, you have like 400 unanswered emails in your personal inbox right now, and a lot of those are from various advocacy organizations that you signed up for. The nice thing about Save the Sound is we don't spam you. If you're getting an action alert from us, it's because we've made a strategic decision that right now it is important for specifically your legislator to hear from you. And whenever you fill out an action alert from us, it's going to specifically to your representative. You don't have to do anything extra. We'll make sure that it goes to the right person. Again, you don't have to be an expert on the policy. You can just care about the issue like pollution or waste or climate or resiliency, and we will put all the facts in there for you. But these are also customizable. So if you want to add in a personalized note to your legislator or to the governor, whoever this is targeting, you can do that. And again, Assemblymember Thiele can speak to this a little bit more, but this matters. Representatives count these letters from their constituents and they really take note of them. And this can be an easier way to get their attention than schlepping up to Albany to eat subpar snacks. And finally, letters to the editor. I had a really eye-opening experience a couple of months ago where I ran into a former professor and he said to me, "Oh yeah, I read your letter to the editor in the Times Union." And I was like, "Wow, people actually read those? That's exciting." People actually do, and especially legislators do go in and read letters to the editor. So this is, sorry. Oh, no, okay. This is something that papers actually want you to do. We've got up here Newsday's their spot on their website where you can submit letters to the editor, and they say, "We deeply value our Newsday community and the conversations we have with you." They want to hear from you. They don't want to necessarily hear from just experts. They want to hear about why you, a person, a member of your community, care about a given issue. And if you have a little bit more expertise, if you're giant nerds like we are, you could write an op-ed, which is a little bit longer. I know the difference between an LTE and an op-ed can seem a little it can seem a little confusing, but an LTE is typically more just from a person who cares about an issue and it's short in the community and it's shorter, whereas an op-ed comes from somebody with a little bit more expertise and is a little bit longer. And so we've got an example of one that David Ansel wrote in Long Island Business News. So that's another way to really get the attention of leaders in your community to pay attention to the issues that you care about. Did you want to add anything else, Ansel?
No, great job. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So yeah, those are some of the sort of key ways you can get involved. And now I would like to turn to having a conversation with former Assemblymember Fred Thiele. Fred Thiele has a very distinguished and long resume of public service. He worked for the town of Southampton and East Hampton. He was a member of the Suffolk County Legislature, as well as being, after that, the supervisor for Southampton, and then spent 30 years in the New York State Assembly representing District 2 and 1 of in Suffolk County. Fred has been, among other committees in service, a great member of the Environmental Conservation Committee and a champion for clean water in the state of New York. And for those of you who live in Suffolk County or know about Suffolk County, water is a very important issue. It's surrounded by water, and the drinking water comes from an aquifer. And Fred has a lot of experience in understanding those issues and how to protect our environment for our health and safety, including the beautiful bays and harbors on the North Shore of in the Long Island Sound. So with that, Fred, I'd like to welcome you. And I thought whatever remarks you'd like to say, but I thought maybe you could give folks a little bit of an overview of your great accomplishment with the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act, which was a really long, persistent success story on your behalf, which I think is going to have a really positive material effect on water quality in the Sound region and Suffolk County. So with that, take it away.
Well, thank you, David, and thanks to Save the Sound for doing this webinar and for inviting me to participate. I really appreciate it. It's great to see all of you. As David said, I'd been a member of the New York State Assembly for nearly 30 years, from 1995 until just this past December. So this is my first time in 30 years where I'm kind of going cold turkey from the budget process and the legislative process. So, I'm enjoying retirement so far, but it's great to talk about these issues. And particularly with regard to water quality, as I was said, I've been in public policy issues on the East End of Long Island for over 40 years. And there definitely has been a change in focus. When I first got involved, the real focus was on land preservation, protecting farmland, open space, the Pine Barrens. It was all about land. Water quality was important, but was kind of in the background. We felt if we did enough to protect land, protect the Pine Barrens, wetlands, et cetera, water quality would take care of itself. And what we found out was that the legacy of development, particularly on Long Island, that water quality was continuing to decline. And that if we didn't do some affirmative actions with regard to infrastructure and remediation, we were going to continue to see declining water quality, which on Long Island isn't just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue. Our economy depends on clean water, whether it's fishing, tourism, the second home industry, farming, all depend on clean water. And as David mentioned, we did an act in the legislature for Suffolk County, but the prelude to that is that then County Executive Steve Bellone realized that water quality was the big issue, and that nitrogen was public enemy number one, and that there needed to be a program to reverse those trends. And the first thing the County of Suffolk did was to put together a plan for all of its sub-watersheds, identifying what the important watersheds were, what the impacts were, and what remediation would be needed to reverse the trend of declining water quality. So having that plan was the first step and was key. It was approved. Those of you that have been doing this for a while know that one of the great fears of all is you spend a couple of $1 million doing a plan, and then it sits on a shelf and nothing ever happens with it. So there was focus on how do we implement this plan, and to implement it required funding. And it didn't require thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars. It was going to take, just in Suffolk County alone, billions of dollars to deal with septic waste, sewage treatment, individual septic systems. And that's where the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act came about. And we really had to find a way to fund the remediation of water quality in Suffolk County. And as David mentioned, this was something that really had been in the works probably for almost a decade, really intensively in the last 5 years, trying to come up with a mechanism to pay for remediating our water in Suffolk County. And some of those early years were just trying to identify what the right solution was. We knew we needed to raise, literally, in the neighborhood of at least $3 billion a year, over a 30-year period to be able to make a dent in this. And we went through a process where, well, we saw what the Chesapeake Bay was doing. We were going to do a fee on water consumption. And we spent a couple of years with that and found out it just didn't fit for Suffolk County. We got opposition from the Suffolk County Water Authority. We would have had to create a whole new collection mechanism for this fee. It was just so cumbersome, and people didn't like it, is what it boiled down to. So ultimately, we went back and figured, people were used to paying a sales tax and a portion of it going to water, and we decided to fund this program with an 1/8% increase in the Suffolk County sales tax. So the Water Quality Restoration Act, really did three things. It allows Suffolk County to consolidate its sewer districts. I think they have something like 25 or 30 separate sewer districts, to be able to consolidate them into one countywide sewer district. Second was this new funding source. And third was the extension of the existing 1/4% sales tax that went to the Drinking Water Protection Program. So in essence, we needed state legislation to authorize the county to do that. And it was going to be subject to a public referendum. The public was going to have to vote to increase taxes for water quality. So we did that legislation. It took a while to get it done, but we finally got it done. Suffolk County Legislature passed their local law, put it on the ballot in this past November, and it got 71% of the vote. And that really gets to, I think, what is the purpose here today is, what can you do? What was successful in that? What is it that you can do to have the same kind of success as we had in Suffolk County? And just a couple of things I think to mention. I think the key thing that I always mention with regard to getting major public policy initiatives done is coalition building. And as you can see, Save the Sound fully recognizes this. You see the coalition of organizations that work together to try to get things done. David mentioned relationships. Relationships are developed, when you do these kinds of lobbying and advocacy initiatives, but some of these relationships are longstanding relationships. One of the recommendations I always make in making in those relationships is they can't just be a one-time thing or a sometimes thing, where when you need something, you call your legislator or you call, other stakeholders and get them involved. It is a continuous and never-ending process of relationship building. And that means contact with your state legislators. It means contact with local government officials. It means contact with other environmental groups and other stakeholders that might have an interest in the issues that you are concerned with. And it also means relationships with those people that oppose you. One of the things I learned early in my political career was that if you want one of your initiatives to fail, ignore your opponents and just talk to your friends. I've found that when you engage those people that are not your natural allies or might be opponents, you first of all, you develop those relationships. Your opponent today may be your friend tomorrow. You never know. And you may find in engaging them that you have more in common, or there's more common ground that you realize, and maybe there's an opportunity for consensus building. Let me just use the Suffolk County Water Restoration Act. The coalition that came together for the Suffolk County Water Restoration Act wasn't just local government. It just wasn't environmental groups. It was also labor. It was also the Long Island Contractors Association, the builders on Long Island, because they all felt that they had a common interest in clean water. So even though, on other issues relating to the environment, maybe builders or labor isn't always your ally, having that kind of relationships and building those relationships is really important. Politics, policy making is a people business. These relationships matter. They count, and whether it's going to Albany for lobby days, which are great. Usually things feel very hurried in Albany. And if you have a meeting in a legislator's office in Albany, you might have 15 or 20 minutes to make your point. We're running to floor votes, or we have committee meetings, or we've got a full calendar worth of appointments. The advantage of lobby days is we're all in the same place at the same time, so you can get to a number of legislators at the same time. But I often find that meetings back in the district office, you're meeting with constituents. I think it's not critical that constituents be from the legislator's district, but it helps. But typically those meetings back in the district office are a little bit more relaxed. We have a little bit more time, and sometimes you can get into a little bit more depth. So, listen, coalition building, relationships. One thing that doesn't get talked about is recognize the political climate that you're operating in. When we were trying to do the Community Preservation Fund, a tax on real estate transactions to preserve open space, when we initially tried to do that, right in the middle of it, there was a recession in 1988, and the real estate market went in the tank. Nobody wanted to hear about that bill after that. The climate wasn't right, and so you have to recognize what political climate you're in. It's not an election year this year, so you don't have that hovering over the session. But listen to what the governor is talking about in general. She's talking about affordability. One of the lessons from the last elections was people are concerned about affordability, the cost of living, how much it takes to buy or rent a house, the cost of food, the cost of gasoline, all of those things. That's the overriding theme of her agenda this year, putting money back in people's pockets and affordability. So look at that and be mindful of that as you're putting your agenda together. And with regard to your agenda itself, one of the things, David mentioned is that things will get added to this as the session goes on, as their new bills go in. This is the beginning of a 2-year session. Bills are just starting to get introduced. So things will get added, but you also need to prioritize your priorities. You have to keep your ear to the ground and get a good sense of what is the possible, for this session, given the legislative climate. And as you get down further and further into the legislative session, you may need to pare your priorities down and focus on those things that you identify that you really have a chance to get adopted and to get passed. And so I'm going to stop there, because I think, we have a plan here, I think, for a little bit of discussion, and from questions from the other panelists and then from you. And I think we can probably address some of these other issues. One last thing that I will mention that didn't get mentioned at the beginning. David talked about really the session being there's two parts to the session. You know, the governor released her budget just last week. The legislature is focused now on passing a budget. You know, the governor came out with her budget. The legislature is beginning to have hearings on the budget that will lead to one house budget bills in both houses in March, and ultimately the passage of a budget. So a lot of focus on the budget. And then, you know, there's a break, and then we go back, and then we focus on legislation. Just a couple of words of warning here. As David mentioned, the budget has been a little bit late the last couple of years. End of April last year, early May the year before. So the budget that period sometimes tends to expand. Then the legislature takes a break, Easter, Passover, and we don't come back to Albany after the budget until the end of April, early May. And because of a change in the political calendar a couple of years, the legislature used to meet to the end of June. Now the legislature finishes basically before June 10th. It's usually like the 7th or 8th of June. So that period for legislation, you know, legislature comes back in late April, early May, and then we as legislators, when I was the chair, we were told, hey, middle of May, you're shutting down your committees. And, you know, we're going to close the committees, and they can only meet when the speaker wants to meet. That time for legislation has become very, very compacted. And the other thing is legislation, especially major initiatives, there are always attempts to get them included as part of the budget. So keep in mind that major legislative proposals, while legislature is focused on in the second part of the session, there's also efforts, good and bad, to try to put legislative proposals in the budget. So you have to keep an eye on that. And with some of these things, you may want to try to get some of your priorities, even though they're legislative, included in the budget, because legislating as part of the budget process, although everybody says they frown upon it, it still seems to happen, you know, with increasing frequency every year. So I'll keep my promise. I'm going to stop right on that.
Thank you. Well, that's an incredible wealth of knowledge and really appreciated. Thank you so much for that. And congratulations on, you know, your first session where you don't have to be driving back and forth to Albany from Suffolk County. I'm sure that's really a pleasure. I want to get back to a couple of the items that Ella raised and get your reaction to them. I think your suggestion for individuals to go to district offices, really smart and a great idea. That's, I think, one of the first, how I met you. I think I came to your district office.
That's right. Yep.
And we were able to have a quiet conversation because we were not in Albany. And I would also like to say on lobby days, one of the other kind of positive and tangible things about if individuals want to come to Albany is it's kind of like being in a big, crazy high school. People are walking up and down the halls. The elevators are full. There's people everywhere. And sometimes the best conversations I've had with a chief of staff from a state senator's office or somebody from Deborah Glick's office is in the elevator or, you know, walking to the next meeting. You can get a lot of work done in the hallways. And so it doesn't always have to be a formal meeting. I wanted to get your reaction to the rallies, press conferences, and also to action alerts. I want to start with action alerts because I worked for a congressman when I was in law school and college and in a district office. And, you know, in those days, letters were letters. You had to mail them in, we'd take them, we'd count them on different issues, and we were sort of tracking. And it took effort to write a personal letter and put it in the mail. And so those were meaningful. How do you feel about action alerts? And how does an assembly member, a state senator, the governor, how do they impact people?
Yeah, I would say my reaction is kind of mixed. One, you know, somebody takes the time and effort to write a personal letter that's distinctive from a form letter. I still think that those have more impact. Action alerts, form letters, I think, the volume of them, indicates the level of support. Sometimes on action alerts, we have, I think, what we might say in a district office, the people that we call frequent flyers, that email us on just about everything every time there's an action alert. So I think the volume of them matters, because it does show the depth of interest in a particular issue. I don't think they count as much as somebody who takes the time to write an individual letter. My other thing that again, these are kind of a little bit of my personal, kind of pet peeves. But if I get an action alert from somebody, or I get an email, a form letter, that's like, asking me to sponsor a piece of legislation that I'm already the sponsor of, or is, sometimes these can be less than not yours, but sometimes when people do action alerts, they're less than friendly. One time somebody wrote me an email, saying, "Don't come home without the New York Heat Act." And, I'm one of the co-sponsors of it. So I think it's important to, in lobbying in general, identify who your friends already are in the legislature. And sometimes I think, they need to be treated differently than the people that you're trying to convince. Don't take for granted, your allies in elected office. But sometimes a form letter that doesn't recognize that they've been in the trenches with you the whole time, is a head scratcher for those of us that are elected officials.
I think you're right, and I think being informed makes those meetings more impactful. And if you're going to have a meeting with someone who's already sponsoring a bill, then you're not asking. Your ask is a different thing. Your ask is, what more can we do?
Yeah, and on those meetings, as you say, some people are reluctant because maybe they don't have in-depth knowledge. Not everybody needs to be the spokesman in the meeting. In fact, the best ones are organized. One or two people will speak. Maybe others will chime in if they have something to say. But that shouldn't deter people from participating. And the other thing I always say with those meetings is, especially if you're in Albany, you got to be able to do them in like 15 or 20 minutes. You might have more time in the district office. Have a 1 or 2 pager that kind of summarizes, your major points that we can review after you're gone to kind of, refresh our memory. A stack of documents, we're not going to look at them. I have to be honest, right? And the other thing that those of us elected officials, we're waiting for the ask. Don't have a meeting and don't have an ask at the end of it. We want to know what it is you would like us to do. Make sure you make the ask of why you're there. So, or that you identify a problem, but you also have the solution, or things that you think can contribute to the solution.
And then we only have about 4 or 5 minutes left. So quickly, I just wanted to get your sense of the effectiveness of like letters to the editor. It's, my experience is, I live in Westchester County. I get these local newspapers, and I read them, but maybe that's just me. But do you find those effective in the community?
I do. People read the letters to the editor. Maybe I'm old school, so I still get my subscription, and I still have my newspaper in hand. But I confess, even an old guy like me, I'm reading the paper online. Probably 80% of the time, and those letters to the editor in my weekly papers, which are very important in my district, those letters are there also. People read them. And they're free. First of all, right? They're attention to your issue that you don't have to pay for. And I think letters are a critical part of any advocacy campaign.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. And is there anything else that we didn't rate? I mean, the district office idea was really a good add. Any other ideas, Fred, that you think are important? And then I'd like to see if we have a few minutes for if anyone has questions.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say is, in addition to being concise and organized when you do the meetings, be sure, you're advocates, but for legislators, you're also sources of information. We're required to kind of be, have a bit of knowledge on almost everything. There's 10,000 bills that get introduced in the legislature, and we can't know it all. So we depend, and I just depend on my environmental advocates and organizations, not just to advocate, but to provide good information. There's an education function that you provide, and it needs to be accurate. Because we're going to rely on it. And the one thing I always tell people when I have a meeting like this, we're all human. There's erasers at the end of pencils for a reason. Sometimes you screw up and you find out something you said or something you provided maybe turned out not to be accurate. It is critical that as soon as you learn that, if you find, you need to go back and correct it. Don't let it sit. We rely on the information we get from you guys. Yeah. And listen, 99% of the time in organizations, very professional, they do a great job. But as I said, everybody makes a mistake. If it happens, correct it, and realize that the function you provide. You're focused on the advocacy, but we're listening to everything. The education function that you perform is a critical part of the environmental process, the political process.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Obviously, here at Save the Sound, we take being a credible partner is critical, but I think your point's really well taken. That just even individuals who want to engage can be informing you about what's going on in the community. And so I know, like for clean water in Suffolk County, the folks are very engaged, but that's sort of true across the board for wherever everyone lives. So thank you, Fred. That was amazing. David Siegerman, do we still have a couple of minutes left, or are we?
We have a minute left in our webinar. Fred, I know you had to leave to go to another one, so
Yep.
we can release you, and thank you, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you for everything you've done all these years.
Hey, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to participate, and good luck with your agenda. I can't vote on it, but I'll still be advocating for it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Fred. Take care.
Thank you. So, David, we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but if there's anybody who has a question right now for David or Ella, that now would be a great time. Raise your hand, and we'll get to you. I'm also going to just very quickly put in the chat a way that you can register to receive emails from us, newsletters, action alerts, those kinds of things, and just kind of as David, Nella, and Fred said, we do like to keep you up to date and up to speed as things evolve. Yeah. So that's now in the chat, but does anybody have a question that they can share? In fact, jump right in if you do.
And if you don't have now, our contact information is up. Always happy to take a phone call or get an email, talk about any of this. And if you're feeling shy about how to get engaged or when to get engaged, or you have questions about any of the legislation or the budget, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. You can help us, and we can help you find ways to participate in your own right at the level that you'd like to. But I think the point is, just to close out, is that the number one most important thing is engagement. If we're going to have impact on policies in the state of New York, we need as many people to be aware of what's going on and to be engaged and participating. So we hope that you will, and we hope that you'll reach out to us if you have any questions or comments about how to move forward. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everybody.